Maybe you still remember the sound, that slight sound, almost imperceptible, of his paws touching the floor of the house. It wasn't tall, it wasn't flashy, but you knew exactly when it was him. And the strangest thing is that sometimes it still feels like you listen, even after everything, even after that last day. Now answer me honestly. Have you ever had the feeling that a habit of your dog just didn't go away? As if something of him was still there, repeating the same small gestures as always? Maybe it's time to sleep. Maybe when you get home. Or that specific moment of the day when he always did the same thing. And for a second, just a second, your heart reacts before your mind, as if he were still there. If you've ever felt this video is for you, because today we're going to talk about something that almost no one has the courage to say out loud. Some of your dog's habits may not have disappeared. And no, this is not about imagination. It's not just about nostalgia either. It's about something that a lot of people have felt, but I couldn't explain it. Throughout this video, you will understand, why do certain behaviors continue to happen? Why does his house sometimes still seem to respond to him? And mainly, what this could mean about the bond you had. Because there is a very big difference between remembering someone and feel as if he were still there. And maybe, just maybe, you are confusing these two things. But before we continue, let me ask you one more question. You still sometimes look at that place in the house where he used to stay and feel like there's something there? It doesn't have to be something visible. It doesn't have to make sense. But there is a feeling, a silent presence, as if the void wasn't completely empty. If this has ever happened to you, stay with me until the end. Because what you will hear here could completely change the way you see these moments. And more than that, it can give you a new way of understanding the longing you feel. Now pay attention to this. Not every habit is just a behavior. Some are such deep emotional marks that leave traces. Traces in the environment, traces in the routine, and sometimes traces that seem to keep happening. And this is exactly where everything starts to get deeper. Because when a dog repeats a habit every day, at the same time, in the same way, he's not just creating a routine, he is creating connection. And true connections do not disappear easily. But then the question remains, if the bond continues, why do certain habits seem to continue as well? Breathe for a second, because what you will realize from now on, it's not just about your dog, it's about what happens when two lives truly connect. And almost no one has explained this to you to this day. There's one thing that almost no one talks about when mourning a dog. It's not just the absence that hurts. It's the way the entire house doesn't seem to accept that he's gone. Because, in the beginning, it's not just you who's weird. The strange routine. The schedules are strange. And somehow difficult to explain. The house itself seems to continue waiting for him. Maybe you've already experienced this. You get home, you open the door, and for a second, just a second, your body reacts as it always has. The heart accelerates slightly. The eyes look in the same place as always, as if he was going to appear there, wagging his tail, waiting for you. Even though I know he's not there. And it happens so automatically, which sometimes scares, because it doesn't just feel like a memory, it looks like an answer. Now think with me. How many times did he wait for you at that door? How many times did he know exactly when you were coming? Even without hearing the car, even without warning? It was as if there was some kind of invisible connection between you, a kind of tune. And that kind of tune, it's not easy to turn off, not even for you, and maybe not even for him. And it doesn't stop there. Inside the house, things also start to look different, or maybe too similar. You pass a room and for a moment you have the feeling that you are not alone. It's not something you see. It's not something you can prove. but it's something you feel, as if there was someone accompanying you, just like he did. Remember that? He followed you around the whole house, even when there was no reason, even when you were just going to grab something quick. He was going after, in silence, without demanding anything, just being close. Now tell me, how many times after he's gone have you had the feeling that you're still not completely alone in the house? That there is an echo of this behavior? If you've ever felt this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And no, that doesn't make you weird. It makes you human. Because when a dog spends years accompanying you, making a presence in every small movement of your day, he is not just taking up physical space. He is taking up emotional space. And that kind of space doesn't empty all at once. There are people who realize this in silence, mainly at night, when everything gets too quiet. And that's right there. That absence begins to make noise. You lie down, try to sleep, and something seems out of place. It's not just a lack of sound. It's a lack of a specific type of presence. Maybe the noise of him adjusting himself in the place where he slept. Maybe the sigh will take. Maybe just the feeling that he was there. And now, the silence feels heavy, different, almost filled. There is a phrase that many people say after losing a dog. The house was empty. But deep down, that's not always what they feel. Sometimes, what confuses the most, it's just that it doesn't feel completely empty. And that's exactly what no one explains. Because mourning a dog is not just about absence. It's an interrupted presence. And when something is interrupted, it doesn't always disappear immediately. Sometimes it continues to manifest itself in subtle ways, on schedule, in habits, in sensations. And that's when that silent doubt arises. That almost no one has the courage to say out loud, is it just in my head? Or is there something beyond that going on? Before you try to answer this, let me tell you something. There is a pattern that repeats itself with many people who have gone through exactly this. And when you notice this pattern, everything starts to make more sense. But also, it becomes impossible to ignore. There was one person who commented on something, which at first glance seemed simple. But the more you think about it, the harder it becomes to ignore. She said that every day around 6 p.m., her dog would run to the door, without fail. It was the time she arrived home from work, even on the days when she was late, even when there was no clear signal. He just knew, and it stayed there, waiting. Now pay attention to what happened after he left. In the first few days, everything was silent, heavy, strange, as if time had lost its rhythm. But about 2 weeks later, something started to happen. Exactly the same time, 6 p.m., she began to notice a faint sound at the door, almost like a scratch, weak, fast, but always at the same moment. At first she ignored it. He thought it was all in his head, or maybe some external noise. But then, it happened again, and again, always at the same time. Until one day. She arrived home early, around 5:50 p.m., and he decided to remain silent, just observing. No TV, no cell phone, no distractions, just waiting. And when the clock struck 6 p.m., the sound happened, at the door, inside. Now tell me, what would you do in this situation? Would you try to explain it rationally? Or would you feel, before explaining? Because that's exactly what happened to her. At that moment, she felt no fear. She felt recognition, as if that gesture wouldn't be strange. It was familiar, and that's what moves the most, because it wasn't just any sound. It was the same pattern, the same type of movement, the same way he had. And here comes something important. It's not about the noise itself. It's about the meaning it carries. Because when a behavior is repeated for years, He leaves a mark, a signature, something unique that doesn't get confused. And maybe you've already experienced something similar. Maybe not with a sound at the door, but with something small, subtle, almost imperceptible, like a movement in the corner of your eye, a feeling of presence when you pass by a specific place in the house, or that automatic impulse to look where it used to be, as if something had called you. If this has ever happened to you, leave it here in the comments. I've felt that. Because when a person talks, seems like a coincidence. But when many people experience the same thing, maybe it's time to pay more attention. And there is a detail in this story which completely changes the way we see all of this. After that day, she wasn't trying to prove anything. She didn't go around telling everyone. She did something different. She began to observe, and he realized that that didn't happen all the time. It wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic. It was specific, linked to a habit, connected to a moment, linked to a routine that existed before, and that raises a question that almost no one asks. And if it's not about coming back, but about continuing? Because maybe some bonds don't need to reappear in a big way to show that they still exist. Maybe they will continue the way they always were, simple, silent, faithful to the same small gestures. Now take a second and think with me. If your dog had a way to reach you, do you think he would choose something strange or something you would recognize right away? This question changes everything because she takes it out of the realm of impossible and places it in the family field. And what is familiar doesn't scare, play. And maybe that's exactly why that so many people are not feel fear in these moments. They miss you, mixed with something difficult to explain, something that seems to say, I'm still here, the way you always knew me. But this leads to something even deeper, because if these habits keep appearing, so maybe we've got it all wrong so far. Now we need to talk about something that almost no one stops to think about. What really is a habit? Because at first glance, it seems simple. A repeated behavior, a routine, something automatic. But when it comes to a dog, especially from a dog that lived by your side for years, a habit is never just a habit. It is a form of bond. Think with me. He wasn't waiting for you at the door just out of habit. He was waiting for you because that meant you. He didn't just follow you around the house out of instinct. He followed you because his presence was linked to yours. And that place where he slept? It wasn't just a comfortable place. It was a connection point, a space where he felt close, even in silence. Now, hold that idea for a second. Because here the conflict begins. Many people try to explain all this rationally, saying that what you feel now is just memory, that the brain recreates patterns, that nostalgia makes you imagine things. And yes, there is a part of this that is true. The human brain actually registers patterns. It creates expectations. He anticipates movements. That's why sometimes you automatically look at the door or think you heard something familiar. But let me ask you something important. If it was just memory, why does it seem so real? Why isn't it just a memory? Why isn't it something distant? Why does it come with sensation, with presence, with that immediate boost in the body, before the mind even understands what is happening? This is the point where a lot of people get stuck, because rational explanation cannot reach everything. And when that happens, discomfort arises, an internal conflict. On the one hand, logic saying, that doesn't make sense. On the other, something deeper saying, but I felt it. And when you feel, it's very difficult to ignore. Now pay attention to this. The habits a dog creates with you are not random. They are reinforced by emotion, by repetition with meaning, by constant presence. And in science, there's something interesting about this. The more emotion is involved in a repeat, the stronger the record, deeper, longer lasting. Now connect this with what you experienced with him. Years of coexistence. Same times, same gestures, same energy exchange every day. You weren't just creating routine, you were creating a shared standard, a type of language. And languages don't disappear easily. They remain, they manifest themselves, they adapt. And sometimes, they continue to be perceived even when one of the parties is no longer physically present. Now let this echo a little inside you. And if what you call a habit is, in fact, a form of connection that has been registered in something deeper than the body, breathe. Because this idea can be uncomfortable at first, but it can also explain a lot of things you've never been able to explain. And here's an important point. You don't have to choose between it's psychological or it's spiritual. Maybe be both. Because the bond you create with your dog, it wasn't just physical. It wasn't just rational. It was emotional. And everything that is deeply emotional leaves marks that do not follow simple rules. Now let me break your pattern for a second. Pay attention to this. Not everything that continues needs to be seen. Some things continue to be felt. And perhaps that is exactly what is happening. Not like something forced, not as something imagined, but as a subtle continuity of something that was strong enough to not simply disappear. And this is where everything changes, because the question is no longer, is this real? And it becomes, what does that mean? And the answer to that, it can be much deeper than you imagine, because when you understand what these habits really represent, you start to realize that maybe this has never been just about routine, and what comes next? It's the point where everything takes on a new meaning. Now, pay close attention to this, because maybe this is the first time someone has explained it to you like this. You're not remembering your dog. You are responding to a bond that still exists. Let this sentence sink in slowly, not as a pretty idea, but as something that maybe explains exactly what you've been feeling, because remembering is something that comes from the mind. But what do you feel in those moments comes before thought, comes in the body, in the reaction, on impulse. It's automatic. It's the same when you still look at the door, at the same time as always, as if something inside you knows that that moment still matters. And here's the point that changes everything. Some bonds don't end. They continue to fade, manifesting in the same gestures. That's the difference. Because if it was just memory, she would be passive. You would remember, and that's it. But that's not what happens. You feel like you are participating in something, as if there was a silent exchange taking place. Now go back to that scene. You arriving home, opening the door. For a second, your body prepares, your gaze searches, your heart reacts. This is not just a memory, that's an answer. And responses usually come from some kind of stimulus, even if this stimulus is not visible. Now think with me. If for years he waited for you in that same place, at the same time, with the same intention, do you really believe this pattern just disappeared? Or does it make more sense to think that something so repeated, so charged with emotion, left a kind of continuity? And you don't need to imagine anything extraordinary, nothing too mystical, because maybe it's exactly the opposite. Talvez a continuidade aconteça, precisely in what was simple, in habits, in small gestures, in what you both effortlessly recognized. There is something that many people report, but they rarely connect. They say things like, I felt like he was there. It felt like something passed through me. For a second, I thought he was going to show up. But they themselves disbelieve it soon after. They try to explain, rationalize, ignore, porque parece mais seguro assim. But let me ask you a question that might change the way you see this. What if you're not imagining it, but perceiving it? Because perceiving is not the same as seeing. Perceiving is recognizing something that makes sense within you, even without external proof. And when that recognition happens, he doesn't come in fear. It comes with familiarity, with that feeling of, that's not weird, that's him. Now hold this, because there is something even deeper. If habits continue to be noticed, it's not because they're stuck in the past. It's because the bond that created these habits has not yet completely dissolved. And that completely changes the perspective of loss, because suddenly, it is no longer about an absolute end. É sobre uma transformação, a change of form, but not in essence. And here's something you might never have thought of. Maybe he doesn't need to come back, because a part of him never left in the way you imagined, not physically, but emotionally, energetically, in the patterns you created together. Now tell me, if you feel, if you recognize, if you react, can this really be ignored? Or maybe, does this deserve to be listened to more carefully? If this has ever happened to you, if you've ever felt this kind of presence in the small details, comment here. He's still here somehow. Because when you say that, you are not stating something irrational. You are recognizing something that your heart already realized a long time ago. And maybe, what have you felt to date? It wasn't just nostalgia. It was contact, silent, subtle, but real enough to keep happening. And if that's true, so the question now is no longer if. The question is, why does this happen? And when does it appear? Now that you've come this far, I want you to forget for a moment everything they tried to teach you about the end, and think with me in a simpler way, more honest with what you felt. What if he's still trying to communicate? Not in a scary way, not in an impossible way, but in the only way that would make sense for you to recognize it, through habits, through the same gestures, through what only the two of you understood. Because let's be honest, if your dog could somehow reach you, do you think he would appear in a completely strange way? Or he would choose exactly what would make you say, that's him. Now go back to those moments. The sound carries through the house, the feeling of being accompanied, that impulse to look at the door. None of this is grand, none of this is exaggerated, but this is all familiar. And perhaps that is exactly the point. Maybe communication, if we can call it that, don't happen in the extraordinary, but not recognizable, in what was already part of your relationship, because a bond cannot be proven. Bond feels, and when something is felt repeatedly, in the same way, in the same context, it starts to carry meaning. Now answer me with your heart, not with logic. What if these moments are not random, but attempts, subtle attempts, almost imperceptible, but consistent enough for you to notice? There is a curious thing that many people report after losing a dog. These signs don't happen all the time. They appear at specific times, moments of silence, moments of more intense longing, momentos em que você está mais sensível, as if there was a window. And this raises something very interesting. Maybe it's not just about him trying, but also about you be able to understand. Because amidst the noise of everyday life, everything goes unnoticed. But when you stop, when you feel, when you allow yourself, something changes. Now pay attention to this. Not every presence needs to take up space. Some presences occupy perception. And maybe that's exactly why you don't see it, but feel. Now let me break your pattern once again. Take a deep breath and think about it calmly. What if the love you built is still looking for a way to continue expressing itself? Not like before, but in a way that is still possible. Because love doesn't just depend on the physical. It depends on connection. And true connections, they do not follow simple rules of beginning, middle, and end. Now tell me, do you really believe that something so intense, so present, so constant, does it just disappear? Or does it make more sense to think that isso continua existindo, even if otherwise? If there is this feeling inside you, don't ignore it. No need to label. You don't need to prove it, but you don't need to deny it either. Because maybe, recognize this. Be a way of honoring what you had. If this touched you in any way, I want to invite you to do something simple. Comment here. I feel like he still finds me somehow. It's not about convincing anyone. It's about recognizing what you've experienced. And when several people start saying the same thing, this is no longer just an isolated experience, and it starts to become a type of shared language. Now put that away, because what you felt like absence, perhaps it was never completely empty. Maybe it was just a shape-shifting presence. And in the end, it all comes back to that simple detail that you may never have seen in the same way again, but now can have a completely different meaning. Maybe you still remember that sound, his paws touching the floor of the house, light, family, almost part of the environment itself. Before, it was just routine, something so common that you didn't even stop to think about it. But now, when that memory comes back, she comes different, stronger, more present, almost as if it carried something more. And maybe it will, because after everything you've noticed so far, that sound is no longer just a memory. He became a symbol, presence, of bonding, of something that wasn't limited to the time you had together. Now think about it calmly. How many times have you lived through this moment without giving it importance? How many times has he passed you by, followed you around the house, lay down in the same place, and you thought it was just another ordinary day? But it never was, because what seemed common, it was, in fact, construction. Construction of something invisible, but extremely real, a type of connection that didn't depend on words, just presence. And that kind of connection não desaparece da mesma forma que começa. It remains. It transforms. And sometimes, now come back with me for the last time, for that moment, you at home, the environment in silence, and for a moment, the sensation. Almost as if he were there, not clearly, not in a concrete way, but present enough for you to understand. Before, this might have confused you. Talvez até te fazia duvidar de si mesmo. But now, maybe you can look at it another way. Not like something strange, but as something consistent with everything you have experienced. Because if the bond was real, continuity can also be, even if subtle, even if silent. And here's something for you to keep. The love that a dog builds with you doesn't end. It changes shape. And maybe that's why that certain habits don't seem to disappear, because they were never just habits. They were language, and true languages do not cease to exist. They just start to be felt differently. Now, before I close, I want to ask you one last question, and answers just for you. If today you felt that same sign again, would you still call it a coincidence? Or would you start to see it as something that still connects you? You don't need to be sure. No need to define. But maybe, just allow this possibility already completely change the way you feel homesickness and transform it into something less heavy and more significant. Now, if you want, tell me here in the comments, what was your dog's most striking habit? The one that only he had. The one that, if it happened today, you would recognize it right away. Because when you share this, you're not just remembering, you are keeping it alive. And maybe this is exactly how certain bonds continue to exist, in the details, in gestures, in the small signs, that only those who lived is able to understand. And if someday, in the middle of the silence, you get that feeling again, don't move away so quickly. Just watch. Because it might not just be nostalgia. It could just be the same bond meeting you again.